you know, they work with kind of dealers as the people who distribute the printers and fax machines, things like that. So just working with the sales reps to kind of initiate, you know, program timing and what kind of programs, things like that. So that's kind of high level, but basically started out in business and kind of worked my way up into more technical aspects of work. And that's kind of just what I'm interested in, you know, the problems that are more technical.
Sounds good. So in the past, what kind of ETL tools you have used? Which one was like for the automation and stuff, for connecting different databases, pulling data from one server to another, for more creating that into more information?
Yeah, I mean, I generally, the tools that I stick to are really Python. So like in terms of database connections, it depends on the database, whether it's, you know, Postgres, it's like PyPG2, Oracle, CX Oracle. So depending on those, I would use those for connections. Sometimes I've used kind of ORMs like SQL Alchemy to make the connections. Really depends on what, but basically I try to stick to as kind of low level as possible, even though it's obviously a high level code. I know people use things like Alteryx, you know, different tools, but I found basically that, you know, there's always edge cases that make those tools kind of less, you know, not efficient, but it's more hassle than it's worth. So I kind of try to stick to that. But we also have a server that is older, and the reason it's kept is because of SOX compliance, different kinds of, you know, logging, and so that uses SAS. So in this role, I've had to kind of work within SAS and kind of also convert some of those processes into a more Python approach. But basically, you know, right now what I'm trying to do is move away. So in this role, I'm more involved with GCP, and so instead of using the client libraries, what I'm trying to do now is more using just the request library and put in, you know, API requests, things like that. So because, for example, the client libraries have a limit of like 20,000. I think it's a little over, but 20,000 rows per insert. So it's kind of, I just wanted to cut out the middleman and, you know, get straight to it. So to answer your question, basically Python is the main tool that I use, and SQL for transforming things like that. So I try to do most of the transformations with SQL. So, you know, Python is more like a glue to kind of put the process in motion. But usually the queries are done obviously in, you know, SQL. So I tend to not try to use libraries like pandas and more try to do it in SQL, you know, on the server side.
Okay, on the server side. And which was the main tool you use for SQL? MySQL, MS SQL?
So actually, when I use Python, I usually use SQLite, but on the local,
okay.
Yeah, on the local, I use Postgres. So I usually use, well, actually, it's interesting because when I was at Canon, you know, and I kind of discovered SQL, I started using SQL Server. When I came on board to Altice, everybody uses Oracle, right? That's kind of the main one that's used to enterprise. But on my local, I like to use Postgres because I was involved in some geospatial projects, and that, you know, that database works very well with shapefiles, things like that. So, you know, on my WSL instances, I usually have Postgres. And then we have BigQuery, obviously.
BigQuery, okay. So have you worked with big data and the cloud computing at all? Or mostly it's at like local site?
Yeah, so I'm basically, the limits are basically BigQuery. So I don't have access. I'm trying very, very hard to get access to like the compute engine, you know, Dataproc, which is kind of like Databricks, things like that. So I haven't actually been able to utilize that. But that being said, I mean, you know, I'm familiar with containerization. I've used that a lot, actually. So from my understanding, you know, basically the main difference is here you're kind of using distributed processing. So whether it's Spark, whatever, you're kind of leveraging the fact that there's multiple processors out there. So I think fundamentally, you know, obviously the queries, for example, I know that Spark, it has, first of all, a Python API, but you can also use SQL for the querying. So I don't think it would be such a big, you know, jump in terms of, you just kind of have to understand when to put that processing power in play, basically.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you for that. And when there are like multiple projects you're working on, how do you decide around the priorities of which one to do first and how to work around that?
Well, that's a good question because a lot of my job is basically handling, it's switching context a lot, basically. So I have the idea that, quality over quantity, but if it's low hanging fruit, it's good to kind of put that out there. But the idea here is like, if I have a project and I have to switch between different things, I try to put out things in batches so that people see that there's some kind of progress so that they don't have to come to me to hunt me down or something like that. And then in terms of picking the most important stuff, it's kind of like, I kind of make like a square, right? What's the most urgent? What's less urgent? What's kind of most important? What's less important? And, obviously the most urgent, most important goes first, and then I kind of work that way. So, things change. It's always in flux, but that's basically kind of how I figure it out,
Got it. Thank you. What would you define the daily responsibility a data engineer has, and how does he go through around the table?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the main responsibility I would, hope is basically making sure the data flows from one place to another in the right way, the most efficiently. Because at the end of the day, the data is meant for use, for business questions, decisions, whatever it is. So, it's important for businesses to be able to rely on that kind of process. So that's kind of the main thing, right? And then be able to build an environment where, it's maintainable, it's scalable, it's durable. So people can build on it. So it's not just like a one-off process. You have a methodology to it that you can build on, and basically it becomes easier to add things to it and build it out. That's kind of my idea of what it would be. So that involves anything from, having the right, whatever, data dictionaries, diagrams, whatever, making sure everything is in place. And if it's, if there's a question about something, try to understand why, there's, that's the solution for it. So that's what I would think. I mean, it's like a subset of software engineering, just focused on the data movement.
Yep, sounds good. So, how would we handle a day-to-day crisis? Let's say we are working with data and somehow there has been some escalation, P1, P2, depending on the type of escalation. So, has there any kind of situation arise in past, and how was it handled?
Yeah, I mean, I deal with campaign teams a lot. So, well, there's one campaign team, but I deal with a lot of people in that team, where basically, I'll give you an example where and I actually have a lot because there's compliance stuff, but this is, for surveys, right? So emails that come out and text messages that go out for surveys, those are important because they let us keep a pulse on kind of the customer service and, try to see where we are in terms of retention and, the technology that we have, if it's even working, because, actually, I think that's a better one. I hate to switch in the middle, but I think that's a better one.
Yeah.
So we actually recently had something where we found out that there's the set-top boxes that we have that we give to customers, there's a flash memory issue in it, right? So obviously you don't want to wait for the customer to come to you with this problem. So an important thing is kind of mitigating it. So, we have a process where basically, because they're not going to go out and change all the boxes, right? They kind of see if there's an issue coming about in the hardware, and then we're able to kind of reach out to these people through email right away, right? So there's a process that that monitors the hardware, and then it populates the table. So from there, I take that and I push it out to the email team, to the campaign team, so that they can notify the customers.